You know what I can describe pretty well by simply saying they don't make them like they used to? Luxury coupes from the 1950s. That might sound like nostalgic rambling, but when was the last time you saw a brand new American coupe that could make grown men weep just by looking at it? I'm talking about real coupes here, not these crossover things pretending to be sporty. The 50s were when American automakers built cars for real men who wanted style, power, and enough chrome to blind oncoming traffic. 1955 Chrysler C300. 1955 Chrysler C300. Let me start with the granddaddy of them all, the 1955 Chrysler C300. This wasn't just a luxury coupe, it was a statement that said, I have money and I'm not afraid to use it on horsepower. Under that massive hood sat a 331 cubic inch Hemi V8 pumping out 300 horsepower. In 1955, that was absolutely insane. Most family cars were making maybe 120 horsepower on a good day. The C300 was Chrysler's answer to the question nobody asked, but everyone wanted answered. What happens when you take a luxury car and give it enough power to embarrass a Corvette? The answer was beautiful chaos. This thing could hit 130 mph when most highways had 55 mph speed limits. It was overkill in the best possible way. But it wasn't just about straight-line speed. The C300 had presence. That grille looked like it could eat other cars for breakfast. The wire wheels were standard, not optional, because Chrysler knew that anyone buying this car wasn't concerned about practicality. They wanted to arrive in style and leave everyone else in the dust. The interior was pure luxury, leather seats, full instrumentation, and enough chrome inside to stock a small parts store. This was before cup holders and navigation systems, when cars were about the pure joy of driving. The C300 cost $4,110 in 1955, which was serious money. For comparison, a Chevrolet Bel Air cost about $2,100. You were paying double for the privilege of owning America's first muscle car, disguised as a gentleman's coupe. 1953 Cadillac Eldorado. 1953 Cadillac Eldorado. The 1953 Cadillac Eldorado wasn't just a car. It was a rolling declaration of independence from practicality. This was Cadillac's halo car, their way of showing the world what American luxury could look like when money was no object. At $7,650, it cost more than most people's houses. Yeah, you read that right. This car was more expensive than a house. But what did you get for that outrageous price? Well, everything. The Eldorado was hand-built in limited numbers. Only 532 were made in 1953. It featured a custom metal tonneau cover, wire wheels, and enough chrome to cause a small solar flare. The wraparound windshield was revolutionary, giving drivers a panoramic view of the road ahead while making everyone else crane their necks to see who was behind the wheel. The 331 cubic inch V8 produced 210 horsepower, which was plenty to move this 4,800-pound beauty down the highway in style. But horsepower wasn't the point. The Eldorado was about making an entrance. It was about pulling up to the country club and having the valet actually smile when he saw you coming. The interior was pure theater. Leather everywhere, power everything, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury yacht. This was before anyone cared about fuel economy or environmental impact. The Eldorado represented peak American optimism, when we believed that bigger was better and more was more. 1957 Ford Thunderbird. 1957 Ford Thunderbird. The 1957 Ford Thunderbird was Ford's answer to the Corvette, except they made it luxurious instead of Spartan. While Chevy was building a sports car for weekend warriors, Ford created a personal luxury car for successful men who wanted performance without sacrificing comfort. It was genius, really. The 57 T-Bird was the last year of the classic two-seater before Ford ruined it by making it a four-seater. This was peak Thunderbird, when it still looked like a jet fighter that had been designed by someone who understood elegance. The porthole windows weren't just styling gimmicks, they were signatures. Everyone knew a Thunderbird was coming by that distinctive silhouette. Under the hood sat a 312 cubic inch V8 that could be had with single or dual 4-barrel carburetors. The supercharged version made 300 horsepower, which was absolutely bonkers for 1957. This was when Ford was trying to prove that they could build something faster than a Corvette while still being comfortable enough for a cross-country trip. The interior was where the Thunderbird really shone. While the Corvette had plastic seats and minimalist everything, the T-Bird had leather, power windows, power seats, and air conditioning. This was a car for grown-ups who had outgrown the need to prove their masculinity through suffering. You could drive this thing to a business meeting and arrive looking like you owned the company. At 3,408, it wasn't cheap, but it was attainable luxury. The Thunderbird proved that Americans would pay for style and performance when it came in a package that didn't require you to be a contortionist to get in and out. 1959. Cadillac Coupe de Ville. The 1959 Cadillac Coupe de Ville was the automotive equivalent of a space rocket designed by someone who had never seen space but had very strong opinions about what it should look like. Those tail fins didn't just reach for the sky, they practically pierced the stratosphere. This was American automotive excess at its absolute peak. Cadillac's designers in 1959 were apparently competing to see who could make the most outrageous car possible, and they all won. The Coupe de Ville was nearly 19 feet long and featured tail fins that added absolutely nothing to performance but everything to presence. When you drove this thing, you weren't just arriving somewhere, you were making a statement that could be seen from low Earth orbit. The 390 cubic inch V8 produced 325 horsepower, which was enough to move this 4,700-pound sculpture down the highway with authority. But again, horsepower wasn't the main attraction. The Coupe de Ville was about showing the world that America had won the war, won the peace, and now we were going to celebrate by building cars that looked like they came from the future. The interior was a pure luxury theater, power everything, air conditioning, and enough chrome to blind a small aircraft. The dashboard looked like mission control for a space program that prioritized style over function. This was when Cadillac meant something, when owning one marked you as someone who had made it in America. The crazy thing is, people actually bought these things. The Coupe de Ville was one of Cadillac's best sellers, proving that Americans in 1959 were completely comfortable with automotive insanity as long as it was luxurious automotive insanity. 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. The 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air might seem like an odd choice for a luxury coupe list, but hear me out. This was the year Chevrolet introduced the small block V8, and suddenly every American could afford to go fast in style. The Bel Air Sport Coupe wasn't just transportation, it was democratized luxury. What made the 55 Bel Air special was that it looked like it cost twice what it actually did. Chevrolet's designers had created something that could park next to a Cadillac without looking embarrassed. The two-tone paint, the chrome side spears, the wraparound windshield. This was serious style at a working man's price. The 265 cubic inch V8 was revolutionary. It was lighter than the old straight six, but produced more power. The Turbo-Fire engine made 162 horsepower in base form, but you could option it up to 180 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor. For 1955, that was enough to embarrass most European sports cars. But what really made the Bel Air a luxury car was the options list. You could get power steering, power brakes, automatic transmission, and air conditioning. This was when options weren't just nice to have, they were statements about your place in the world. A fully loaded Bel Air said you were successful, but not pretentious. The interior was surprisingly upscale for a Chevrolet, patterned cloth and vinyl seats, full instrumentation, and enough chrome to make you feel like you were driving something expensive. This was the car that taught America that luxury didn't have to come with a luxury price tag. 1958 Buick Riviera. The 1958 Buick Riviera was what happened when Buick decided to build a hardtop that looked like it was designed by someone who understood both luxury and aerodynamics. Well, maybe not aerodynamics, but definitely luxury. This was the year Buick went completely insane with chrome and somehow made it work. The Riviera featured Buick's Fashion Air Dynastar grille, which sounds like something from a science fiction movie, but was actually just a lot of chrome arranged in a way that looked expensive. The side trim was pure art, flowing from the front fender to the rear deck like someone had drawn it with a ruler and a lot of confidence. Under the hood sat a 364 cubic inch V8 that produced 250 horsepower in base form, or 300 horsepower with the optional 4-barrel carburetor. This was serious power for 1958, enough to move the Riviera's 4,400 pounds with authority. The Dynaflow automatic transmission was standard because real men didn't need to shift gears to prove their masculinity. The interior was where Buick really showed their luxury credentials. Deep pile carpeting, leather-appointed seats, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury yacht. The instrument cluster was a work of art, with gauges that actually worked and chrome that reflected light in ways that made you feel important. At $3,717, the Riviera was serious money, but it was also a serious car. This was Buick's way of proving that they could build something that would make Cadillac owners think twice. It was luxury without the pretension, power without the drama. 1956, Continental Mark II. The 1956 Continental Mark II was Ford's attempt to out-luxury Cadillac, and for a brief moment they actually succeeded. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement that American luxury could be subtle, elegant, and still cost more than most people's annual salary. At $9,795, it was the most expensive American car you could buy. Ford Motor Company created an entirely separate division just to build the Mark II. The Continental Division was given an unlimited budget and one simple mandate: build the finest car in the world. The result was a masterpiece of restraint in an era of excess. While other manufacturers were adding more chrome and bigger fins, the Mark II was elegantly simple. The 368 cubic inch V8 produced 285 horsepower, which was enough to move this 4,800-pound monument to good taste with dignity. But the Mark II wasn't about acceleration times or top speed. It was about arriving in style and leaving an impression that lasted long after you'd driven away. The interior was pure luxury, leather everywhere, power everything, and a level of craftsmanship that made other American cars look like they were assembled in someone's garage. Every Mark II was hand-finished, with attention to detail that wouldn't be seen again in American cars for decades. The tragic thing about the Mark II was that it was too good for its own good. Ford lost money on every one they built, and after 2 years, they gave up and replaced it with a cheaper, more conventional car. But for those 2 years, the Mark II proved that American luxury could compete with anything the world had to offer. 1957 Chrysler 300C. The 1957 Chrysler 300C was what happened when Chrysler decided that the original C300 wasn't quite insane enough. This was the 3rd year of the letter series, and by 1957 they had perfected the formula for building cars that could kill you with style. The 300C wasn't just fast, it was stupid fast. The 392 cubic inch Hemi V8 produced 375 horsepower in standard form, or 390 horsepower with the optional high-performance cam. In 1957, that was enough power to embarrass most everything on the road, including cars that cost twice as much. The 300C could hit 60 mph in under 8 seconds, which was absolutely bonkers for a 4,000-pound luxury car. But the 300C wasn't just about straight-line performance. Chrysler had learned from racing and applied those lessons to the street. The suspension was tuned for handling, the brakes were heavy-duty, and the steering was precise. This was a car that could take corners like it was angry at them. The styling was pure aggression wrapped in luxury. The grille looked like it could eat other cars. The side trim was minimal but effective, and the overall proportions were perfect. This was what a luxury muscle car should look like: elegant but dangerous. The interior was surprisingly restrained for a Chrysler. Leather seats, full instrumentation, and just enough chrome to remind you that this was still a luxury car. The 300C was about performance first, luxury second, and it worked beautifully. At $4,129, the 300C was expensive, but not ridiculously so. It was the thinking man's muscle car, the choice for someone who wanted to go fast but didn't want to look like a teenager while doing it. 1959 Oldsmobile 98 Holiday. The 1959 Oldsmobile 98 Holiday was Oldsmobile's answer to the question of how to make a luxury car that looked like it came from the future without actually being from the future. The result was a car that looked like it should have been driven by someone in a silver jumpsuit and helmet. The 98 Holiday featured Oldsmobile's linear look styling, which was their way of saying they had drawn a lot of straight lines and called it design. But somehow it worked. The car looked modern, sophisticated, and expensive. The wraparound windshield was huge. The rear window was nearly as big, and the overall effect was like driving in a glass house. Under the hood sat a 394 cubic inch V8 that produced 315 horsepower, which was enough to move this 4,300-pound spaceship down the highway with authority. The Hydra-Matic transmission was smooth and responsive, making the '98 Holiday feel like it was floating on air. The interior was where Oldsmobile really showed its luxury credentials: power everything, air conditioning, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury spacecraft. The seats were incredibly comfortable, the ride was smooth, and the overall experience was like being transported to the future. The '98 Holiday was also surprisingly practical for a luxury coupe. The trunk was huge, the back seat could actually accommodate adults, and the overall package was well thought out. This was luxury that you could actually live with, not just pose in. At $3,937, the '98 Holiday was competitive with other luxury coupes, but offered more style and features than most. It was Oldsmobile's way of proving that they could compete with Cadillac and Chrysler while still being distinctly Oldsmobile. 1953 Buick Skylark. The 1953 Buick Skylark was Buick's attempt to create a show car that you could actually buy, assuming you had serious money and weren't concerned about practicality. This was one of the first modern convertibles, and it was gorgeous in a way that made other cars look like they were designed by accountants. The Skylark was built to celebrate Buick's 50th anniversary, and they didn't hold back. The body was lowered, the wheelbase was shortened, and the overall effect was like someone had taken a regular Buick and made it perfect. The wire wheels were standard, the whitewall tires were mandatory, and the overall package was pure automotive jewelry. Under the hood sat a 322 cubic inch V8 that produced 188 horsepower, which was plenty to move this 4,300-pound beauty down the highway with grace. The Dynaflow automatic transmission was smooth and sophisticated, making the Skylark feel like it was powered by magic rather than internal combustion. The interior was a pure luxury theater. Leather seats, power everything, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury yacht. The instrument cluster was a work of art, with gauges that actually worked and chrome that reflected light in ways that made you feel important. But the Skylark's real party trick was the convertible top. This wasn't just a soft top, it was a power-operated masterpiece that could transform the car from a coupe to a convertible in seconds. In 1953, that was serious technology. At $5,000, the Skylark was expensive, more expensive than most Cadillacs. But it was also exclusive, with only 1,690 built in 1953. This was a car for people who wanted to be different, who wanted to drive something that nobody else had. 1955 Packard Caribbean. The 1955 Packard Caribbean was Packard's final attempt to prove that it could still build cars that mattered. This was their halo car, their way of showing the world that Packard luxury was still relevant in an era of Cadillac dominance. The Caribbean was gorgeous, powerful, and tragically too late to save the company. The Caribbean featured Packard's request styling, which was their way of saying they had hired real designers and actually listened to them. The result was a car that looked modern, sophisticated, and expensive. The side trim was minimal but effective, the proportions were perfect, and the overall package was pure automotive art. Under the hood sat a 352 cubic inch V8 that produced 260 horsepower, which was competitive with anything Detroit was building in 1955. The Ultramatic transmission was smooth and responsive, making the Caribbean feel like it was powered by silk. The interior was where Packard really showed their luxury credentials. This was a company that had been building luxury cars since before World War I, and they knew how to do it right. Leather everywhere, power everything, and a level of craftsmanship that made other American cars look mass-produced. The Caribbean was also available as a convertible, which was the ultimate expression of 1950s luxury. Power top, leather seats, and enough chrome to cause a small solar flare. This was what success looked like in 1955. At $5,132s, the Caribbean was expensive, but not ridiculously so. It was competitive with other luxury cars, but offered more style and heritage than most. The tragedy was that Packard was already dying, and the Caribbean was their beautiful swan song. 1958 Lincoln Continental Mark III. The 1958 Lincoln Continental Mark III was Lincoln's attempt to build a car that looked like it belonged in the future, assuming the future was designed by someone who really liked chrome. This was peak Lincoln excess, when the company decided that if some chrome was good, more chrome was better. The Mark III featured Lincoln's directional styling, which was their way of saying they had drawn a lot of straight lines and called it modern. The result was a car that looked like it should have been driven by someone in a science fiction movie. The grille was massive, the side trim was extensive, and the overall effect was like driving a chrome-plated spaceship. Under the hood sat a 430 cubic inch V8 that produced 315 horsepower, which was enough to move this 5,000-pound monument to excess down the highway with authority. The turbo-drive transmission was smooth and sophisticated, making the Mark III feel like it was floating on air. The interior was a pure luxury theater. Power everything, air conditioning, and a dashboard that looked like mission control for a space program. The seats were incredibly comfortable, the ride was smooth, and the overall experience was like being transported to a luxury hotel that happened to be moving. The Mark III was also surprisingly practical for a luxury coupe. The trunk was enormous, the back seat could accommodate adults, and the overall package was well thought out. This was luxury that you could actually live with, assuming you didn't mind the stairs. At $5,825, the Mark III was expensive but competitive with other luxury cars. It was Lincoln's way of proving that they could compete with Cadillac while still being distinctly Lincoln. 1956 DeSoto Adventurer. The 1956 DeSoto Adventurer was what happened when DeSoto decided they wanted to build a car that could compete with the Chrysler 300 series, but with more style and less aggression. The result was a car that looked like it was designed by someone who understood both luxury and performance. The Adventurer featured DeSoto's forward-look styling, which was their way of saying they had hired Virgil Exner and actually listened to him. The result was a car that looked modern, sophisticated, and fast. The side trim was distinctive, the proportions were perfect, and the overall package was pure automotive art. Under the hood sat a 341 cubic inch Hemi V8 that produced 320 horsepower, which was enough to embarrass most everything on the road. The PowerFlight automatic transmission was smooth and responsive, making the Adventurer feel like it was powered by controlled explosions, which it was. The interior was where DeSoto really showed its luxury credentials. This was a company that knew how to build cars for successful people, and the Adventurer reflected that knowledge. Leather seats, power everything, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury yacht. The Adventurer was also available as a convertible, which was the ultimate expression of 1950s style. Power top, leather seats, and enough performance to make driving fun again. This was what success looked like in 1956. At $3,628, the Adventurer was reasonably priced for what you got. It was DeSoto's way of proving that they could compete with Chrysler and Cadillac while still being distinctly DeSoto. The tragedy was that DeSoto was already beginning its decline, and the Adventurer was one of their last great cars. 1957 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser. The 1957 Mercury Turnpike Cruiser was Mercury's attempt to build a car that looked like it belonged in the space age, assuming the space age was designed by someone who had never actually been to space but had very strong opinions about what it should look like. This was peak Mercury excess, when the company decided that more was definitely more. The Turnpike Cruiser featured Mercury's dream car design, which was their way of saying they had taken a show car and somehow made it street legal. The result was a car that looked like it should have been driven by someone in a silver jumpsuit. The roof was retractable, the rear window was huge, and the overall effect was like driving in a glasshouse. Under the hood sat a 368 cubic inch V8 that produced 290 horsepower, which was enough to move this 4,200-pound spaceship down the highway with authority. The Merco-Matic transmission was smooth and sophisticated, making the Turnpike Cruiser feel like it was powered by the future. The interior was where Mercury really went crazy. Power everything, air conditioning, and a dashboard that looked like mission control for a luxury space program. The seats were incredibly comfortable, the ride was smooth, and the overall experience was like being transported to the future. The Turnpike Cruiser's real party trick was the breezeway rear window, which could be opened for ventilation. This wasn't just a gimmick, it was serious technology that made the car more comfortable in an era before reliable air conditioning. At $4,203, the Turnpike Cruiser was expensive, but not ridiculously so. It was Mercury's way of proving that they could compete with Buick and Oldsmobile while still being distinctly Mercury. The car was ahead of its time, maybe too far ahead. 1959 Pontiac Bonneville. The 1959 Pontiac Bonneville was Pontiac's way of proving that they could build a luxury car that didn't look like it was designed by committee. This was the year Pontiac introduced the split grille that would become their signature, and they did it in style. The Bonneville was gorgeous, powerful, and distinctly Pontiac. The Bonneville featured Pontiac's wide-track stance, which was their way of saying they had made the car wider and somehow made it look better. The result was a car that looked planted, aggressive, and expensive. The side trim was minimal but effective, the proportions were perfect, and the overall package was pure automotive art. Under the hood sat a 389 cubic inch V8 that produced 315 horsepower, which was enough to move this 4,300-pound beauty down the highway with authority. The Hydra-Matic transmission was smooth and responsive, making the Bonneville feel like it was powered by controlled violence. The interior was where Pontiac really showed their luxury credentials. This was a company that was learning how to build cars for successful people, and the Bonneville reflected that learning. Leather seats, power everything, and a dashboard that looked like it belonged in a luxury sports car. The Bonneville was also available as a convertible, which was the ultimate expression of late 1950s style. Power top, leather seats, and enough performance to make driving an event rather than just transportation. This was what success looked like in 1959. At $3,478, the Bonneville was competitively priced for what you got. It was Pontiac's way of proving that they could compete with Buick and Oldsmobile while still being distinctly Pontiac. The Bonneville was the beginning of Pontiac's transformation from conservative to exciting. Looking back at these 15 luxury coupes, you realize we lost something when cars became sensible. Sure, modern cars are safer, more efficient, and more reliable. But do any of them make you feel like you're piloting a piece of American optimism down the highway? These cars were built when America believed in excess, when more was always better, and when style mattered more than practicality. They were rolling sculptures that happened to have engines, and will never see their like again.